Chloe Evans had exactly two major problems in her completely average, caffeine-fueled 21 years of life. The first was her crippling, secret addiction to terribly written fantasy romance web novels. You know the ones. Titles like The Tyrant Emperor's Runaway Secret Baby Bride, or I Was Betrayed by the Crown Prince, so I Married His Hot Uncle. The plotlines were always identical. The male leads always had eyes as cold as the northern winds, and Chloe devoured them like popcorn. Her second problem was Liam Hayes. Liam was the absolute bane of her existence. He was a smug, obnoxiously tall, and frustratingly handsome business major, whose sole purpose on earth seemed to be making Chloe's life miserable. If Chloe needed a specific library book, Liam had checked it out 3 minutes prior. If Chloe was presenting a passionate group project, Liam was the one in the back row pointing out a typo on slide 4. They were locked in a bitter, unspoken war of petty academic sabotage. Naturally, it made perfect sense that Liam was the last thing Chloe saw before she died. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romance Crave Stories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. It happened on a rainy Tuesday outside a discount grocery store. Chloe was carrying a comically large paper bag filled with discounted cabbages and a newly purchased copy of the infamous novel The Duke's Tearful Rose. Liam, holding an artisanal matcha latte, had just opened his mouth to make a snide comment about her cabbages when disaster struck. A rogue, out-of-control electric scooter, piloted by a terrified squirrel, don't ask, careened around the corner. Liam lunged out of the way, directly into Chloe. The two of them crashed into a towering pyramid of canned baked beans. A single, heavy can of beans dislodged from the very top, plummeted downward, and knocked them both out cold. Forever. Death, Chloe assumed, would be a peaceful void. Instead, it was aggressively pink. She woke up gasping, not on the wet pavement smelling of baked beans and matcha, but in a massive 4-poster bed draped in rose-colored silk. She shot up, her hands flying to her head, only to find her messy bun replaced by elaborate, gravity-defying blonde ringlets. "My Lady Seraphina," cried a maid, rushing to her side with a silver basin. "You have awakened from your fainting spell. Oh, thank the goddess." Chloe froze. Seraphina? She scrambled out of the bed, tripping over a nightgown that probably cost more than her college tuition, and threw herself in front of a gilded floor-length mirror. Staring back at her was a drop-dead gorgeous woman with piercing red eyes, and a sneer seemingly permanently etched into her flawless features. Panic, icy and sharp, flooded her veins. She knew this face. She knew this ridiculous, over-the-top bedroom. She had reincarnated into the Duke's Tearful Rose. And she wasn't the sweet, innocent protagonist. She was Lady Seraphina von Vane, the ultimate villainess. The wicked, jealous antagonist who famously gets her head chopped off via a magical, glowing guillotine in Chapter 85 for pouring lukewarm tea on the heroine's dress. "No, no, no," Chloe muttered, pacing the plush carpet. "I am not getting executed over a beverage. I have to change the plot. I have to avoid the Crown Prince, be nice to the heroine, and most importantly, stay away from the cold Duke of the North." The cold Duke, Lord Alexander, was the bloodthirsty anti-hero of the novel. He was described as a man of few words, prone to freezing his enemies into ice sculptures, and fiercely protective of the heroine. 3 days later, the royal banquet arrived. The exact scene where Seraphina was supposed to make a fool of herself. Chloe, determined to survive, dressed in a muted, respectable gown and hovered near the dessert table, minding her own business and aggressively avoiding eye contact with anyone who looked like a main character. Then the grand door swung open. The room fell dead silent. The temperature in the ballroom literally dropped 10 degrees. "Announcing His Grace, Lord Alexander, the Duke of the North," a herald shouted. Chloe peeked over a tower of macarons. Striding into the room was a man of frightening presence. He had broad shoulders, a tailored black military uniform dripping with silver medals, and a dark cape billowing dramatically behind him. His jawline could cut glass. But as he stepped into the chandelier's light, Chloe's breath hitched. The Duke scanned the room with a look of utter, unmistakable exhaustion. He locked eyes with Chloe across the ballroom. His cold, icy blue eyes widened. He didn't draw a sword. He didn't sneer. Instead, the cold Duke of the North Speed walked past the trembling nobility, marched directly up to Chloe, grabbed her by the elbow, and dragged her behind a heavy velvet curtain. "What is your problem?" Chloe hissed. She was about to be turned into an ice cube. The Duke dragged a hand down his face, completely ruining his intimidating aura. He leaned in, his voice a frantic, completely unaristocratic whisper. Chloe? Is that you? Please tell me you're not the one who bought those stupid cabbages. Chloe's jaw dropped so hard it practically unhinged. She stared at the Duke of the North, looking past the dramatic cape and the icy aura. Liam! She shrieked. Keep your voice down, he hissed, looking wildly around the curtain. I woke up 3 days ago in an ice castle surrounded by guys with broadswords calling me, Your Grace. Do you have any idea how hard it is to pretend to be an imposing warlord when the last thing you remember is getting assassinated by a can of baked beans? Chloe started laughing. It wasn't a delicate, noble laugh. It was a hysterical, wheezing cackle. The most dangerous man in the Empire, the Cold Duke, was her obnoxious college rival. They were stuck in a romance novel. They were supposed to be mortal enemies. But looking at Liam's panicked face, Chloe realized the plot of this book was about to go completely off the rails. Chapter 1. Chloe stared at Liam. Liam stared at Chloe. The heavy velvet curtain shielding them from the rest of the ballroom muffled the grand classical orchestra into a dull, thumping bass line. Baked beans, Chloe whispered, the sheer absurdity of the situation finally anchoring her to reality. We were taken out by discounted legumes. It was a family-size can, Chloe. Have some respect, Liam hissed, tugging at the ridiculously high, stiff collar of his black military uniform. He looked like he was suffocating in silver embroidery and unwarranted authority. Do you have any idea what my life has been like for the past 3 days? I woke up in a fortress made of literal ice. There's no central— Oh, you poor baby, Chloe deadpanned, crossing her arms. You lack modern plumbing? That's tragic. Truly. Let me play you a sad song on the world's smallest violin. Meanwhile, do you know who I am? Some fancy lady with a terrible personality? Liam guessed, raising an arrogant eyebrow. It was the exact same obnoxious expression he used whenever he found a flaw in her supply chain management presentations back on campus. I am Lady Seraphina von Vane. Chloe poked him hard in the chest, ignoring the fact that underneath his velvet sash, he was surprisingly solid. The Duke's physical stats must have carried over. I am the villainess of this stupid web novel we've been shunted into. Liam blinked, his annoyance faltering. Web novel? What are you talking about? The book. The Duke's tearful rose. I was holding it when we died. Chloe dragged a hand down her face, careful not to dislodge her elaborate, gravity-defying blonde ringlets. We are trapped inside a trashy romance novel. And as the villainess, my character's entire narrative purpose is to bully the sweet heroine, throw massive tantrums, and eventually get executed in Chapter 85. Liam's icy blue eyes widened. Executed? Like hanging? No, via magical, gloving guillotine, corrected grimly. And guess who gives the official order for my execution? The heroine's fiercely loyal, stoic, cold-blooded protector. She pointed a manicured finger directly at his nose. You. The Cold Duke of the North. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Liam looked down at his gloved hands, then back up at Chloe. The arrogant frat bro facade completely crumbled, replaced by the panicked realization of a 22-year-old college student who was entirely out of his depth. I'm supposed to chop off your head? He whispered. Not if we change the plot, Chloe said, her mind racing. Look, I know we hate each other. I know you stole the last copy of Macroeconomics for Dummies from the library, and I know I sabotaged your PowerPoint projector last semester. I knew it. Liam threw his hands up in outrage. Focus, Hayes. Chloe snapped. We have to form a truce. A temporary, purely survival-based alliance. If we want to avoid the guillotine, and if you ever want to see an indoor toilet or a functioning internet connection again, we have to team up. Liam rubbed his temples, displacing a perfectly styled lock of dark hair. Fine. Truce. What's the plan? We just don't do the things the book says we do. Exactly. We speedrun this, Chloe nodded, feeling a spark of actual, desperate hope. We push the heroine and the crown prince together. We avoid all major conflicts. We don't start any wars, and we stay completely under the radar until the happily ever after hits and hopefully resets us back to the real world. Sounds easy enough, Liam said, exhaling a long breath. He offered her his hand. Deal, Evans. Chloe looked at his hand, then met his gaze. It was completely surreal. Her worst enemy, looking like a ridiculously attractive gothic romance cover model, was her only ally in a world actively trying to kill her. She firmly shook his hand. Deal, Hayes. Now let's go out there and act natural. Liam snorted, peeking through a small crack in the velvet curtain. Right. Natural. I'll just go back to glaring at people until they pee themselves. And you go. Do whatever it is a villainess does when she's not pouring tea on people. I'm going to eat my weight in macarons, Chloe declared, smoothing her skirts. Welcome to the fantasy genre, frat boy. Try not to die. Chapter 2. The grand ballroom of the Imperial Palace was a sensory overload of gilded chandeliers, heavy silk drapery, and aggressively floral perfumes. Chloe, having decided it was too risky to hide behind the velvet curtain all night, had strategically repositioned herself next to the dessert pavilion. She focused her attention on a towering display of strawberry and lavender frosted petit fours, trying her hardest to blend into the pastel draped scenery. Okay, just be nice, Chloe muttered to herself under her breath, popping a lavender cake into her mouth. Be a supportive girl's girl. Do not throw any beverages. Do not get decapitated. A sudden hush fell over the crowded room, followed immediately by a collective, dramatic gasp from the nobility. The grand mahogany doors had swung open again. Standing at the threshold was Alara, the novel's undisputed heroine. She was devastatingly radiant, seemingly illuminated by a magical, invisible ring light. Her gown was a flawless, soft pastel pink, exactly FFC 0CB, Chloe's. According to the plot of the Duke's Tearful Rose, this was the exact moment Lady Seraphina was supposed to accidentally trip Alara, tearing that delicate pink silk and sparking the crown prince's protective fury. Chloe wiped a stray pastry crumb off her cheek, took a deep breath, and marched directly toward the heroine. Across the room, Liam watched her go. He was currently leaning against a marble pillar, attempting to execute the cold Duke's signature brooding glare. Unfortunately, trying to project stoic, bloodthirsty intimidation when you are internally panicking about medieval sanitation standards is incredibly difficult. Instead of looking dangerously aloof, Liam's brow was furrowed, his jaw was rigidly clenched, and he looked like he was battling a severe case of acid reflux. Lady Seraphina. A smooth, dangerous voice purred from behind Alara. Chloe skidded to a halt. Stepping out from the shadows of a nearby tapestry was the Crown Prince, Julian. He was tall, blonde, and possessed a jawline so sharp it probably required a safety warning. He glared down his aristocratic nose at Chloe, stepping protectively in front of the trembling heroine. Is there a problem here? A problem? Chloe beamed, forcing her face into a smile so wide and enthusiastic it made her cheeks ache. Absolutely not, Your Highness. I was simply coming over to tell Lady Alara how stunning she looks tonight. Honestly, that dress? A complete serve. The pastel pink is entirely your color. It complements your undertones perfectly. Alara blinked, thoroughly bewildered. The cold villainess, who had been glaring daggers at her all evening, was now enthusiastically reviewing her color palette. Thank you, Lady Seraphina, Alara stammered, offering a hesitant, incredibly sweet smile. No, thank you, Chloe pressed on, grabbing Alara's hands and giving them an affirming squeeze. Women supporting women. If anyone spills anything on you tonight, you let me know, and I will personally fight them. Prince Julian stared at Chloe as if she had just sprouted a second head. He opened his mouth to interrogate her bizarre behavior further, but a sudden, heavy presence materialized beside them. Liam had abandoned his pillar. He loomed over the group, his broad shoulders blocking the chandelier's light. He tried to give Chloe a subtle, "What are you doing?" look, but his face remained frozen in a stiff, uncomfortable scowl. Duke Alexander, the Crown Prince said, his eyes narrowing in instant suspicion as he looked between Liam and Chloe. I wasn't aware you were so closely acquainted with Lady Seraphina. We aren't, Liam blurted out instantly, his frat bro panic momentarily overriding his Duke persona. He quickly cleared his throat, forcibly deepening his voice to a gravelly timbre. I mean, we merely exchanged pleasantries regarding the architectural integrity of the velvet curtains. Chloe closed her eyes in brief, agonizing defeat. The architectural integrity of the curtains? Prince Julian's suspicious gaze darted from Liam's sweaty brow to Chloe's forced, painful grin. In the original novel, the Duke and the Villainess rarely interacted, save for exchanging thinly veiled, highly venomous insults. Seeing them awkwardly orbiting each other, and exchanging panicked glances set off every royal alarm bell in Julian's head. I see, Julian said slowly, his tone dripping with skepticism. Well, lovely chatting with everyone. Chloe chirped loudly, grabbing Liam tightly by the sleeve of his dark uniform. His Grace and I were just about to discuss the local agricultural economy. Fascinating stuff. Toodles. Without waiting for a response, Chloe dragged the supposedly bloodthirsty Duke of the North back toward the dessert table, leaving the Crown Prince and the heroine staring after them in utter confusion. Architectural integrity? Chloe hissed once they were safely out of earshot. I panicked. Liam whispered back defensively, snagging a strawberry petit-four off the nearest silver platter. He's intimidating up close. And why were you holding her hands? I'm surviving. Yes. I'm being a supportive icon. Chloe shot back, realizing with a sinking feeling that their attempt to stay completely under the radar was already spectacularly failing. Chapter 3. The solarium of the Vane estate had undergone an aggressive, overnight rebranding. Out went the oppressive, dark maroon drapery and the vaguely threatening oil paintings the original Lady Seraphina had favored. In their place, Chloe had cultivated a soft, airy atmosphere that heavily mimicked the cozy, lo-fi study cafes she used to spend hours in back on Earth. Sunlight filtered through sheer light curtains, illuminating round tables laden with delicate treats. Chloe had practically held the estate's head chef hostage in the kitchens until they perfected her menu. Fresh strawberry tarts, lavender-infused scones, and a remarkably accurate attempt at iced matcha, achieved by aggressively whisking finely ground imported green tea leaves. It was the perfect, low-stakes environment to casually gossip with the high society ladies and gather intel on the Crown Prince's schedule. Everything was going perfectly until the heavy oak doors banged open. The chatter of a dozen noble women died instantly. Standing in the doorway, looking entirely too massive for the delicate pastel room, was Duke Alexander. He wore his usual dark, imposing attire, his cape billowing slightly, his face set in an icy glare. The ladies held their breath. Was the cold Duke here to declare war? To execute a rival? Liam's eyes locked onto the dessert table. He marched straight past a fainting Viscountess, pulled out a wrought iron chair beside Chloe, and sat down heavily. To what do I owe the pleasure of this intrusion, Your Grace? Chloe asked, keeping her smile perfectly pleasant while discreetly kicking him under the table. Official duchy business, Liam grunted in his deepest, most intimidating baritone. He then reached out with a leather-gloved hand, seized 3 lavender scones, and piled them onto a floral plate. Leaning in close, he muttered out of the corner of his mouth, My head chef served me boiled cabbage for breakfast, Chloe. Just cabbage. In water. If I don't consume a carbohydrate in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to commit treason. Chloe sighed, sliding a cup of iced matcha toward him. Drink this and act scary. People are staring. While Liam aggressively consumed the pastries, frightening the surrounding nobility with his voracious appetite, Chloe pulled a small, gilt-edged notebook from her lap. If they were going to push the Crown Prince and the heroine together, they needed a foolproof plan. She scribbled a quick note in English, a language entirely foreign to this medieval fantasy world, and slid it over to Liam under the guise of passing the sugar. We need a timeline for the upcoming hunting festival. Have you mapped out Julian's route? Liam wiped a crumb from his chin, took the charcoal pencil, and quickly sketched out a response. He didn't just write words. Being a business major, he defaulted to what he knew. He drew a surprisingly complex flowchart, complete with data points and a crude supply chain diagram tracking the prince's known movements versus the heroine's expected location. Optimizing the encounter rate here, Liam wrote beneath a graph that looked suspiciously like a bell curve. If we position Alara near the western woods, the probability of intersection is 85%. Chloe snorted softly, taking the pencil back. She immediately began correcting his bad handwriting, color-coding the tactical map with a pink pastel marker she had fashioned out of crushed berries. Your data analysis is sloppy, she wrote back, adding a series of precise, aesthetically pleasing bullet points beneath his graph. You didn't account for the prince's royal guard detail. We have to isolate him first. Across the solarium, the noble women watched in trembling horror. The wicked Villainess and the bloodthirsty Duke were passing notes written in a bizarre, chaotic script that looked like no known alphabet. They were drawing jagged symbols, strange geometric shapes and harsh lines. By the goddess, whispered Lady Beatrice, clutching her pearls. Are they drafting a demonic cipher? They're casting a hex on the Crown Prince, another lady gasped, her face pale. Look at the dark magic flowing from their quills. Oblivious to the fact that they were rapidly cementing their reputation as the most magically unhinged villains in the Empire, Chloe and Liam continued their silent, furious debate over the logistical timeline of a forced romantic meet cute. Past the strawberry tarts, Liam muttered, adding another node to his tactical espionage flowchart. This plotting business makes a man hungry. Chapter 4. The Royal Rose Garden at dusk was supposedly the most romantic location in the entire imperial palace. Chloe, however, currently considered it a logistical nightmare. She was crouched behind a meticulously manicured hedge of white roses, her muted skirts bunched uncomfortably around her knees, frantically swatting away a mosquito. Beside her, crammed into a space much too small for his broad shoulders, was Liam. He was entirely decked out in his heavy, silver-buttoned duke attire, clutching a jeweled broadsword with the awkward grip of a man who only knew how to wield a ping-pong paddle. "Remind me again why we are hiding in the dirt?" Liam grumbled, trying to untangle his excessively dramatic cape from a thorny branch. "Because Chapter 22 explicitly states that Lady Alara takes a moonlight stroll here, and an assassin sent by a rival faction tries to stab her," Chloe whispered back, checking her pocket watch. "You are supposed to leap out of the shadows, deflect the dagger with a spectacular parry, and catch her as she faints. This is the catalyst for your epic romance. It's a pivotal plot point, Hayes. Do not mess this up." "I've never held a sword in my life," Liam hissed, panic edging into his voice. "The heaviest thing I've ever swung was a 9-iron at my dad's country club." "Just look intimidating and swing hard," Chloe commanded. "Sure. Target acquired. Maintain silence." Down the moonlit gravel path, Alara appeared. She looked ethereal, her pastel pink gown practically glowing in the dim light. Right on schedule, a dark figure detached itself from the shadow of a marble fountain. The assassin, clad in canonical black leather, drew a wicked-looking dagger that glinted menacingly in the moonlight. "Go." Chloe shoved Liam's shoulder. Liam lunged forward to execute his heroic rescue. Unfortunately, his heavy wool cape was still firmly hooked onto the rosebush. He lurched out half a step, was violently yanked backward by the tensile strength of the thorns, and tumbled backward into the dirt with a loud, metallic clatter of armor. The assassin whipped around. Alara screamed. Chloe realized with horrifying certainty that the cold duke was currently incapacitated by shrubbery. Panic seized her. The script was broken. If the heroine died here, the entire world's plotline might collapse. Abandoning all dignity, Chloe scrambled out of the bushes and did the only thing her adrenaline-fueled brain could compute. She ran in the opposite direction to find the royal guards. However, she completely misjudged the volume of her petticoats. As she pivoted to sprint, her embroidered satin heel caught the hem of her own dress. She pitched forward, arms flailing wildly, calculating the exact trajectory of her impending doom. She didn't hit the ground. Instead, she careened directly into the back of the assassin's knees like a human bowling ball. The assassin let out a bewildered yelp and face planted into the gravel, the dagger skittering away into the flower beds. "Chloe!" Liam yelled. Finally freeing himself from the villainous rosebush, he abandoned the useless broadsword entirely. Relying purely on muscle memory from his sophomore-year intramural flag football league, the Duke of the North charged. He launched his massive frame through the air, wrapping his arms around the assassin's waist and executing a flawless, bone-rattling form tackle that drove the wind out of the attacker with a sickening thud. Silence descended on the garden, save for the groans of the squashed assassin trapped beneath 200 pounds of panicked frat bro. Chloe slowly pushed herself up, spitting a mouthful of dirt and rose leaves. Her immaculate ringlets were ruined, and her dress was covered in mud. She groaned, rubbing her bruised knee. "Oh my goddess!" a tearful voice cried out. Alara rushed forward. Chloe braced herself, expecting the heroine to fall into Liam's heroic, albeit unconventional, embrace. Instead, Alara completely bypassed the Duke. She dropped to her knees right in the dirt next to Chloe, her innocent eyes wide with absolute awe and unabashed adoration. "Lady Seraphina." Alara gasped, gently taking Chloe's mud-stained hands in her own. You threw yourself in front of a blade to save me. You tackled that ruffian without a second thought. I have never witnessed such breathtaking bravery." Liam, still sitting on top of the groaning assassin, stared at them. He slowly raised a hand. Actually, I tackled." "You are my savior," Alara interrupted, gazing deeply into Chloe's eyes, her cheeks flushing a delicate, rosy shade. "I misjudged you completely, my lady. You have the heart of a true knight." Chloe stared blankly at the heroine's sparkling, intensely romantic gaze. She looked over at Liam, who simply mouthed the word oops. The plot hadn't just derailed. Chloe had accidentally stolen the male lead's girl. Chapter 5. Chloe paced the length of her private chambers, violently whisking a bowl of iced matcha until it frothed over the edges. The vector field of this romance is completely misaligned, she muttered, her mind frantically trying to map out Alara's affection levels like a complex ordinary differential equation. Her affection coefficient for me is dangerously high. If we consider this entire plot a Hilbert space of romantic possibilities, we need to drastically shift the coordinates back to the Crown Prince before I end up accidentally marrying the heroine. Liam, slouched inappropriately on a delicate velvet chaise lounge, rubbed his temples. English Chloe. I'm a business major. I don't speak advanced functional analysis. She has a crush on me, you idiot. Chloe Whisper shouted, slamming the bamboo whisk down. Because you couldn't untangle yourself from a bush. I looked like a knight in shining armor. Today is the Imperial Hunt. It is a critical event. We need to make Prince Julian look incredibly, undeniably cool in front of her. Fine, Liam sighed, hauling his massive armor-clad frame off the chaise. I'll handle the prince. I'll be his wingman. I manage social media strategies. I can handle the PR of one arrogant royal. 2 hours later, the imperial hunting grounds were bustling with activity. Banners fluttered in the wind, and the nobility milled about in their finest riding gear. Liam cornered Crown Prince Julian near the weapon racks, where the royal was inspecting a gilded crossbow with a fierce, brooding intensity. Your Highness, Liam started, dropping his voice into the gravelly baritone of the cold duke, while casually leaning against a weapon stand. A word regarding Lady Alara. Julian's eyes narrowed instantly. What of her, Alexander? I saw how she looked at Lady Seraphina in the rose garden. The villainess is clearly manipulating her with dark sorcery. No sorcery, Your Highness. Just horrible relationship dynamics, Liam said, deciding to treat the prince like a stubborn junior analyst. Look at it logically. Right now your approach to wooing her is too predictable. You're a constant variable. If you want her attention, you need to disrupt the algorithm. You have to treat this like cleaning a messy dataset in our script. You need to introduce an outlier to test her emotional engagement. Julian stared at him, utterly bewildered by the barrage of modern terminology. A data, what? Speak plainly, Duke. Liam sighed, slipping back into his old fraternity house habits. Just neg her, bro. Neg. Yeah. Give her a backhanded compliment, Liam explained, clapping a heavy, leather-gloved hand on the prince's shoulder. Lower her defenses. Make her seek your validation. Tell her you like her horse, but it looks a little slow. Classic move. Julian looked dubious, but as Alara approached the stands, looking radiant in a delicate riding habit, the prince straightened his posture, determined to reclaim his status as the romantic lead. Chloe watched from the sidelines, holding her breath as the narrative variables converged. Julian stepped into Alara's path. He struck a dashing pose, resting a hand on his sword hilt. Lady Alara, he proclaimed loudly, that riding habit is adequately constructed, though I must say, the pastel pink washes out your complexion and severely highlights the asymmetry of your posture. A dead silence fell over the hunting party. Alara's doe-like eyes widened in horror. Her lower lip began to tremble. Instead of seeking his validation, the heroine burst into loud, heartbroken tears. She spun around, completely ignoring the stunned crown prince, and sprinted directly toward the sidelines. Lady Seraphina. Alara wailed, throwing her arms around Chloe's waist and burying her tear-streaked face into Chloe's bodice. His Highness is so cruel. Please tell me I don't look asymmetrical. Chloe stood frozen, awkwardly patting the sobbing heroine's hair while shooting a look of pure, unadulterated fury across the clearing. Liam was standing next to the equally stunned crown prince, slowly face-palming with his leather gauntlet. The ordinary differential equation of their survival had just sprouted a wildly unstable, non-trivial solution. The plot wasn't just broken, it was actively turning into a disaster, and Chloe was officially stuck as the heroine's emotional support villain. Chapter 6. We are engaged, Chloe declared, slamming her bedroom door shut and leaning against it with wild, panicked eyes. Liam, who had been aggressively pacing her pastel-draped solarium, stopped dead in his tracks. Excuse me? I thought the plan was to avoid the magical guillotine, not legally bind ourselves in a feudal matrimonial contract. It's a fake engagement, Hayes, Chloe snapped, frantically shoving a stack of silk chemises and a stolen bag of lavender scones into a velvet traveling trunk. The crown prince thinks you're actively trying to sabotage his love life, and the heroine is one emotional breakdown away from asking me to elope. The plot is a complete disaster. The only way to reset the narrative variables is to completely remove ourselves from the equation. Liam crossed his arms, his heavy silver-buttoned uniform gleaming in the afternoon light. He looked incredibly imposing until he let out a loud, stressed groan. Fine. What's the excuse? You, the cold Duke of the North, are overcome with sudden, violent passion for the wicked Villainess, Chloe recited rapidly. You cannot bear to be parted from me, so you are dragging me back to your frozen, plumbing-less wasteland of a territory for a rushed wedding. It gets us out of the capital immediately. 2 hours later, the happy couple was bouncing mercilessly inside a gilded carriage, leaving the imperial palace in their dust. The silence inside the cabin lasted exactly 15 minutes before the bickering began. Can you close your window? Chloe shivered, pulling a thick fur blanket up to her chin. It's practically Arctic in here, and we aren't even out of the central provinces yet. I am the cold Duke of the North, Liam shot back, stretching his long legs out and taking up entirely too much space on the velvet benches. My canonical body temperature runs hot. If I close the window, I will start sweating through this stupid wool uniform again, and the scary Vib will be completely ruined. Chloe scowled, aggressively huddling deeper into the furs. This is the worst road trip of my life. The scenery is terrible, the suspension on this carriage is a joke, and I am bored out of my mind. If I were back in Lagos, I'd at least have my crochet hooks and a stash of thick wool. I could have whipped up 3 halter tops and a scrunchie by now. Instead, I'm stuck staring at your brooding face for the next 4 days. Liam snorted, finally reaching over and snapping the leather window shutter closed. The draft instantly ceased. Oh please. You wouldn't be crocheting. You'd be locked in the campus library, color-coding your study notes just to make sure they looked prettier than mine. They were prettier than yours, Chloe countered automatically. They were completely illegible, Liam teased, a genuine, relaxed smile finally breaking through his usual scowl. Stripped of the cold Duke persona and the frat boy arrogance, he just looked like a tired, normal guy. You used a different pastel highlighter for every single paragraph. It was a visual nightmare. It was an aesthetic system, Chloe defended, tossing a slightly crushed lavender scone at his head. He caught it effortlessly and took a bite. And it worked. I got a 98 on our final data analysis project. You got a 94. Liam chewed the scone thoughtfully, looking out the sliver of space between the shutters as the medieval countryside rolled by. I didn't care about the grade, he said quietly, his voice losing its mocking edge. I just argued with you because it was the only time you actually looked up from your laptop and talked to me. Chloe blinked. The carriage hit a bump, jostling her shoulder against his arm, but neither of them pulled away. She stared at the man she had considered her nemesis for the past 3 years. You sabotaged my supply chain presentation just to get my attention? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. I pointed out a minor logistical flaw, Liam corrected. A faint flush creeping up the back of his neck that had nothing to do with his canonical body temperature. And you threw a dry erase marker at my head. You deserved it, Chloe murmured, though the venom was completely gone. As the carriage rumbled onward toward the frozen north, the heavy, suffocating panic of their situation began to lift. Crammed into a freezing carriage with no Wi-Fi, no modern amenities, and a bag of stolen pastries, Chloe realized a truth. She was actually enjoying his company. The enemies to lovers trope wasn't just a cliché web novel plotline anymore. It was becoming a very real, very complicated problem. Chapter 7. The northern fortress of the Alexander Duchy was exactly as described in the novel. A monolithic structure of black stone and ice, jutting out of a snow-covered mountain like a jagged tooth. It was imposing, highly defensible, and possessed absolutely zero curb appeal. Inside, things were even worse. Chloe sat wrapped in 3 layers of fur at a massive, dark oak table in the Duke's study. Spread out before her were dozens of crumbling parchment scrolls. Liam was pacing in front of the roaring fireplace, looking genuinely distressed. It's a disaster, Liam groaned, running a hand through his dark hair. The tax structure makes no sense. The agrarian output is technically negative. They are literally taxing the peasants for the amount of snow that falls on their roofs. Who wrote this economic policy? A supervillain? Well, you are the villainous Duke, Chloe pointed out, pulling a scroll toward her. Let me look at the raw data. She stared at the chaotic scribbles of the medieval accountants. It was a completely unstandardized nightmare. Do you have any idea how much I miss spreadsheets right now? Chloe sighed, rubbing her temples. If I just had a basic grid. Hell, I'd settle for a buggy Google Sheet. Do you know how hard it is to manually clean a dataset without our programming? I'm going to have to run a regression analysis using charcoal and an abacus. Liam stopped pacing. You know how to do that? I'm a data analyst, Hayes, Chloe said, grabbing a fresh sheet of parchment and a ruler. Give me an hour. For the next 60 minutes, the cold Duke watched in silence as the wicked Villainess aggressively restructured the entire northern economy. Chloe drew meticulous columns and rows, transforming the chaotic ledgers into a perfectly organized, albeit analog, spreadsheet. Okay, look here. Chloe tapped her charcoal pencil against a newly formed column. Your primary export is iron ore, but the transportation costs are eating all your profit margins. However, look at this outlier, northern iceberries. They taste incredibly sour, Liam noted, leaning over her shoulder. He was so close she could smell the faint scent of pine and wood smoke on his uniform. And the locals just pack them in giant, wooden barrels stamped with a snarling direwolf. Exactly. Bad marketing, Chloe declared, her graphic design instincts taking over. They're sour raw, but what if we boil them down into jam? We pivot the product from rugged survival food to a luxury artisanal preserve. We completely overhaul the branding. Overhaul the branding of a feudal territory? Liam raised an eyebrow, though he was visibly intrigued. Yes. We ditched the direwolf. It's too aggressive, Chloe said, sketching rapidly. We need a minimalist, soft vibe. Think lo-fi winter cafe. We put the jam in small, delicate glass jars. We use a muted pastel color palette for the labels, maybe a soft icy blue and a pale pink. A hex code like Fadad would look stunning against the dark berries. We sell it to the capital's high society at a 400% markup. Liam stared at her sketched labels. His frat bro sarcasm was completely gone, replaced by the sharp, appreciative gaze of a business major recognizing a brilliant market strategy. You want to rebrand the cold northern territory into a boutique lifestyle brand, he concluded. I want us to be so economically indispensable that the crown prince can't afford to execute us, Chloe corrected, blowing a stray blonde curl out of her face. If we control the luxury goods market, we control the capital's nobility. Over the next month, the northern fortress transformed. The gloomy halls were suddenly filled with the sweet scent of boiling berries. Chloe meticulously managed the supply chain, while Liam used his imposing Duke persona to negotiate mercilessly favorable trade agreements with the southern merchants. Late one night, long after the castle had gone to sleep, they were still in the study. Chloe was tallying their first month of profits while Liam stamped official wax seals onto the trade decrees. Hey, Liam said softly, breaking the quiet crackle of the fireplace. Chloe looked up. We make a pretty good team, he said, holding up a beautifully packaged jar of minimalist, pastel-labeled iceberry jam. Who knew the data analyst and the business bro would conquer the feudal economy? Chloe smiled, a warm, genuine feeling blooming in her chest that entirely combated the freezing drafts of the castle. Just wait until we introduce them to custom progress bars and tiered loyalty programs, Your Grace. They won't know what hit them. Chapter 8. The blizzard hit with the subtlety of a freight train. Chloe and Liam had been inspecting a border town, tracing a minor bottleneck in their new artisanal jam supply chain, when the sky violently darkened. Within minutes, the mountain pass was buried under 3 feet of snow. Their carriage was stuck, their guards were grounded, and the cold Duke of the North and his wicked fiancée were forced to seek shelter in the only establishment within miles. The prancing Direwolf Tavern. The innkeeper, trembling at the sight of the Duke, had given them his best room. Chloe stood in the center of the drafty, dimly lit chamber, staring at the singular piece of furniture. Absolutely not, she declared, crossing her arms. It's a bed, Chloe, Liam said, shaking a layer of snow off his heavy cape. A very small, very lumpy-looking bed, but a bed nonetheless. There is only one, Chloe pointed out, her voice rising in pitch. This is a trope, Hayes. This is the oldest, most overused, structurally exhausted trope in the history of romance literature. We are not doing the oh no, there is only one bed. We must awkwardly share it routine. I will sleep on the floor. The floor is made of raw pine planks and we are in the middle of a sub-zero blizzard, Liam retorted, kicking his boots off. You'll freeze to death in your sleep, and then I'll have to explain to the crown prince why I brought the Villainess to the mountains just to let her turn into a popsicle. Just get in. I'll keep to my side, you keep to yours. 10 minutes later, the peace treaty was already failing. Stop pulling the quilt. Liam hissed into the darkness. I know I canonically run hot, but I'm wearing a thin linen tunic, and you have literally cocooned yourself into a wool burrito. I need the structural integrity of the blanket fort to feel safe, Chloe argued, clutching the edges of the quilt to her chin. Besides, your shoulder is taking up 80% of the mattress. Move over. If I move over any further, I will fall out the window. They lapsed into a tense, frustrated silence. The wind howled against the wooden shutters, rattling the iron hinges. The hearth fire crackled, casting dancing, flickering shadows across the wooden ceiling. Chloe let out a long, quiet sigh, the adrenaline of the day finally draining away. I was supposed to upload a video today. Liam shifted beside her, the mattress groaning in protest. What? In the real world, Chloe whispered, staring up at the shadows. I had this whole launch planned. I spent weeks creating a multi-time zone upload schedule, so it would premiere perfectly for my viewers in EST, CET, and WAT. It was going to be an aesthetic study with me video. I built these custom progress bars in DaVinci Resolve using the Fusion page and macros. It took me 3 days to get the node tree right. And now, I'm in a medieval tavern, smelling like wet dog and wood smoke. Liam was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know you edited your own stuff. That's actually incredibly impressive. I tried to use Canva for a marketing project once, and nearly threw my laptop out a window. Chloe let out a surprised, soft laugh. It's not that hard once you learn the interface. She paused, her chest tightening with an unexpected wave of homesickness. I was also supposed to volunteer this weekend, teaching kids the basics of STEM. Now my greatest educational achievement is forcing your royal accountants to understand the concept of a pivot table. Hey, Liam's voice was gentle, entirely devoid of his usual frat bro sarcasm. He turned his head on the flat pillow to look at her. You saved my duchy's economy. You turned a frozen wasteland into a luxury export hub. Those kids would be lucky to have you, but the people here? They were starving before you reorganized the supply lines. Chloe turned her head, meeting his gaze in the dim firelight. The space between them on the small bed suddenly felt very narrow, but not in a threatening or annoying way. It felt incredibly dangerously warm. Do you miss it? Chloe asked softly. Your real life. Liam searched her eyes. I miss the convenience, he admitted, his voice dropping to a low murmur. I miss my phone. I miss decent coffee. I definitely miss central heating. He hesitated, reaching out slowly from beneath his side of the quilt, his fingers lightly brushing against the back of her hand. But honestly, Evans, if waking up from this means going back to just glaring at you from across the campus library, I'm not sure I want to go back. Chloe's breath hitched. The wind outside continued to rage, but inside the cramped, drafty room of the prancing Direwolf Tavern, the plot of the Duke's Tearful Rose had finally, irreversibly changed. Chapter 9. Spring had finally thawed the Northern Territory, but the atmosphere inside the Duke's study was decidedly frosty. Chloe sat at the heavy oak desk, staring at an ornate scroll bearing the official, wax-sealed crest of the Imperial Royal Family. It had been delivered by a trembling Imperial envoy just an hour prior. Next to the scroll sat a beautifully packaged jar of their latest triumph. Northern Iceberry Jam, infused with a hint of cinnamon and wrapped in a delicate pastel label that was currently dominating the capital's luxury market. Treason, Liam read, leaning over her shoulder and tapping the parchment with a heavy, leather-clad finger. He's formally accusing us of treason. Gross manipulation of imperial commerce, unsanctioned amassing of provincial wealth, and inciting rebellion through the monopolization of breakfast preserves. Is he serious? He's terrified, Chloe corrected, her mind racing as she traced the calligraphic letters. Julian isn't a complete idiot. We've redirected 80% of the southern merchant caravans to the north. The capital's nobility is obsessed with our brand. We built a functional, thriving economy in 6 months, and his tax revenues are plummeting because everyone is buying our artisanal goods instead of his heavily taxed imperial imports. Liam groaned, sinking into a nearby armchair and rubbing his temples. We were just trying not to starve, and now we've accidentally launched a full-scale economic rebellion. It's worse than that, Chloe whispered, the color draining from her face as she reached the bottom of the decree. She pointed to a specific, heavily inked paragraph. Look at the penalty. Liam leaned forward, his icy blue eyes scanning the text. His breath hitched. Should the Duke of the North and his betrothed fail to surrender their assets and submit to imperial judgment within a fortnight, they shall be branded enemies of the crown and subjected to the justice of the luminescent blade. The luminescent blade, Liam repeated slowly. That's the magical glowing guillotine, Chloe finished, feeling a cold knot of genuine dread settle in her stomach. Chapter 85. The exact execution method from the original web novel. Silence stretched across the study, heavy and suffocating. Despite their best efforts, despite avoiding the heroine, faking an engagement, and fleeing to the frozen north, the narrative of the Duke's tearful rose was fighting back. Fate, it seemed, was incredibly stubborn. The plot was course-correcting, desperately trying to force the Villainess and her new ally toward their doomed, canonical ending. We changed the entire genre of this story from romantic fantasy to a corporate management sim, Liam said, his voice quiet but laced with rising anger. And it still wants to chop our heads off. Chloe closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady the erratic pounding of her heart. She was a data analyst. She didn't do panic, she did problem solving. She opened her eyes, a fierce, determined light replacing the fear. We aren't going to the guillotine, she declared, grabbing a fresh piece of parchment and her charcoal pencil. Liam looked up. Chloe, the Imperial Army has 50,000 men. We have a highly motivated brigade of jam makers, and a few thousand northern guards. If he marches on us, we can't win a traditional war. Who said anything about a traditional war? Chloe smiled, a sharp, calculating expression that perfectly suited the wicked Lady Seraphina. She began aggressively sketching out a flowchart. Julian is using a medieval political system to try and bully us. But he's dealing with two modern college students who know how to exploit a bureaucratic loophole. Liam stood up, walking back over to the desk. The frat bro panic had vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a business major staring down a hostile corporate takeover. What are you thinking? He's accusing us of unsanctioned wealth amassing, Chloe pointed to her diagram. But according to the original duchy charter you signed when you took over, all northern exports are legally categorized as provincial survival efforts. Technically, we haven't broken any imperial laws, we've just ruthlessly optimized them. We need a countersuit, Liam realized, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. If we can prove that his tax hikes are actually the illegal action, if we audit the Crown's ledgers, we can corner him legally before a single sword is drawn. Exactly, Chloe said, tapping the charcoal against the desk. We are going to weaponize accounting. We compile the data, we organize the supply chain ledgers, and we present irrefutable proof that the Crown Prince is guilty of gross financial incompetence. Liam reached across the desk, grabbing the jar of iceberry jam. He held it up like a trophy. Then let's get to work, Evans. It's time to show the Empire what happens when you mess with our profit margins. Chapter 10. The declaration of war arrived not with a trumpet blast, but with a highly passive-aggressive scroll detailing the Crown Prince's intent to liberate the North from its fiscal tyranny. Julian was marching 30,000 troops toward the Silver Peaks border. Inside the northern fortress's war room, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. Liam stood at the head of a massive stone table, flanked by his seasoned generals. He was fully decked out in black plate armor, looking every inch the bloodthirsty warlord he was supposed to be. Then the heavy oak doors banged open. In strode Chloe. She had completely abandoned her corsets and massive silk petticoats. Instead, she wore a highly practical, tailored set of dark leather riding gear, customized with a soft, pale pink linen cloak. She marched right up to the war table, completely ignoring the stunned, hardened military commanders, and slammed a heavily annotated map down over Liam's troop placements. You're deploying the infantry to the lower valley, Chloe stated, tapping her charcoal pencil against the parchment. That is statistically a terrible idea. Chloe, what are you doing in here? Liam hissed, his intimidating warlord aura immediately evaporating. And why are you wearing a sword? You don't even know how to cut your own steak without complaining that the knife is too heavy. It's a cute accessory, Chloe dismissed, waving a hand. Pay attention. You are treating the Crown Prince's advance like a random variable. It's not. He's incredibly predictable. According to the original plot of the novel, Julian favors flanking maneuvers through the weeping forests. She began drawing rapid, aggressive lines across the map. If we treat his troop movements as a first-order linear ordinary differential equation, and factor in the terrain's gradient as our integrating factor, his optimal path always converges right here. She stabbed her pencil into a narrow pass on the map. The Obsidian Gorge. If you put your infantry in the valley, he'll trap you. You need to take the high ground at the gorge. The northern generals stared at her, utterly bewildered by her terminology, but the logic of the tactical choke point was undeniable. She is not entirely wrong, Your Grace, General Vance muttered, stroking his thick beard. The gorge provides a superior defensive matrix. I know she's not wrong, Liam sighed, dragging a heavy gauntlet down his face. He dismissed the generals with a wave of his hand. Once the heavy doors clicked shut, leaving them alone in the echoing room, he turned to her. You are staying here, Liam ordered, his voice dropping into a desperate, pleading tone. Inside the fortress. Behind walls that are 50 feet thick. Absolutely not, Chloe shot back, rolling up her map. You are functionally not good at medieval warfare, Hayes. If I let you go out there alone, you'll probably try to challenge the Crown Prince to a game of beer pong to settle the dispute. I am coming with you. Chloe, it's an actual battlefield. Liam grabbed her shoulders, his icy blue eyes wide with genuine panic. There will be arrows. And swords. And guys on horses. I can barely swing my own broadsword without pulling a hamstring. If something happens to you out there. He stopped, swallowing hard, his voice cracking slightly. I love you, but you are an actual idiot if you think I'm letting you anywhere near the vanguard. Chloe froze. The charcoal pencil slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the stone floor. Liam froze too. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. The frat bro sarcasm was gone. The fake engagement was entirely forgotten. You. Chloe started, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might dent her cutesy leather armor. You just. Liam closed his eyes, a deep flush creeping up his neck. He didn't take it back. He didn't try to play it off as a joke. He just pulled her in, wrapping his heavy, armored arms around her, burying his face into her pale pink cloak. I'm an idiot, he murmured against her shoulder. I got us killed by a can of baked beans. I dragged you to a freezing wasteland, and I completely ruined your upload schedule. But I am not losing you to Julian. Chloe hesitantly wrapped her arms around his incredibly unyielding plate armor, resting her cheek against the cold metal of his pauldron. A small, brilliant smile broke across her face. Well, she whispered, her voice suspiciously thick. Good thing my tactical analysis has a 99% success rate. We ride at dawn, Your Grace. Try not to fall off your horse. Chapter 11. The command tent at the edge of the Obsidian Gorge was surprisingly cozy, considering it was pitched on a jagged precipice overlooking an impending medieval battlefield. Chloe had insisted on bringing a plush rug and several fur blankets to offset the martial aesthetic, much to the confusion of the northern generals. Liam was pacing again, his heavy plate armor clanking softly. He held a small glowing blue crystal in his hand, the Tearful Rose artifact. Supposedly a legendary heirloom handed down through generations of northern dukes, Liam had spent the last 6 months using it as a paperweight for his tax documents. Are you absolutely sure about this choke point? Liam asked, staring at her tactical map. Julian's forces outnumber us 3-1. It's a spatial bottleneck, Chloe replied confidently, adjusting the cumbersome straps of her leather bracers. His numbers won't matter if only 50 men can pass through the gorge at a time. It's basic fluid dynamics applied to military strategy. We just hold the line. Liam paused, looking down at the glowing rock in his hand. It was pulsing faster than usual, casting erratic, strobe-like blue shadows across the tent canvas. Hey, did your web novel mention anything about the Duke's paperweight vibrating? Because it feels dangerously warm right now. Chloe walked over, frowning. The Tearful Rose is supposed to activate only during moments of narrative climax. It's a plot device, Liam. Don't drop it. Before she could even touch it, the crystal flared with a blinding, white light. The tent, the map, and the heavy fur blankets vanished in an instant. Chloe gasped, falling backward, but she didn't hit the dirt floor. She was standing in a sterile, brightly lit room that smelled aggressively of bleach and hand sanitizer. The only sound was the steady rhythmic, utterly modern beep 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 of a heart monitor. What? Where are we? Liam's voice echoed, sounding oddly muffled. He was standing next to her, still in his imposing armor, but he looked slightly translucent, like a poorly rendered hologram. Chloe spun around. Lying in the center of the room were 2 hospital beds. Oh my God, Chloe whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. In the left bed lay Liam, hooked up to an array of tubes, a thick white bandage wrapped securely around his head. In the right bed lay Chloe, a neck brace securing her spine and M4 drip taped to the back of her hand. They weren't dead. We're in comas, Liam breathed, stepping closer to his own unconscious body. He stared at the glowing green lines of the monitor in total disbelief. The baked beans, they didn't kill us. They just gave us massive concussions. The vision wavered, the harsh fluorescent hospital light flickering as if the simulation was struggling to buffer. The climax, Chloe realized, the pieces of the narrative puzzle snapping together in her highly analytical brain. Web novels operate on structural energy. We've hijacked the plot, but the story still demands a resolution. When we reach the climax of this war, the defeat of the antagonist, the resolution of the conflict, the narrative arc will officially close. The magic holding our consciousness inside this book will dissipate. If we defeat Julian tomorrow, Liam said slowly, turning his gaze away from his comatose body to look at her. We wake up. The hospital room violently dissolved, slamming them back into the drafty command tent at the edge of the gorge. The blue crystal in Liam's hand went completely dark, returning to its mundane, inactive state. The silence that followed was deafening. Just an hour ago in the war room, they had finally admitted their feelings for each other. Now they held the exact, irrefutable blueprint to escape the novel entirely. We get to go home, Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly. She thought of her real life. Her dual degrees, her complex video editing timelines, the comforting humidity of her city, and the simple joy of grabbing a real, overpriced iced coffee. We can actually go back. Liam looked down at the dark crystal, his jaw tight, his broad shoulders suddenly looking incredibly heavy. But what happens to this? He gestured vaguely between the two of them. To us. If the magic dissipates and resets the world, what if our memories of this place go with it? What if we wake up and you just go back to glaring at me in the campus library? What if you don't remember that we built an entire economy together? Or that I just told you I? He trailed off, looking devastatingly vulnerable beneath his armor. Chloe walked over, closing the distance between them. She reached out, wrapping her hands firmly over his cold metal gauntlets. I won't forget, Chloe said fiercely, her red villainous eyes blazing with genuine, stubborn determination. My brain is literally trained to store, analyze, and retain complex data. Hayes, you are permanently written into my long-term memory. I am not letting a magical web novel reset delete my character development. Liam sighed, a reluctant, incredibly fond smile finally breaking through his worry. He turned his hands over, intertwining his armored fingers with hers. Okay, he whispered, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her forehead. Then let's go legally and tactically overthrow an empire, so I can take you out on a real date. Chapter 12. Dawn broke over the Obsidian Gorge with exactly the kind of dramatic, bleeding red sky that fantasy authors love to use to foreshadow a massive battle. On one side of the narrow pass stood the Imperial Army, 30,000 strong, their armor gleaming in the early light. At their head rode Crown Prince Julian, mounted on a pristine white stallion, his golden hair blowing perfectly in the wind. He drew his jewel-encrusted broadsword, the blade catching the sun. It was a picture-perfect, epic fantasy moment. On the other side stood the northern forces. They were vastly outnumbered, but completely silent, holding the choke point exactly as Chloe had predicted. From the northern ranks, two figures rode forward. Julian's eyes narrowed, preparing his epic villain monologue. He expected the Duke of the North to charge him with a bloodthirsty roar. Instead, Duke Alexander rode out at a very sensible, leisurely trot. He wasn't even holding his sword. Riding beside the Duke was Lady Seraphina. She wasn't cowering in a carriage. She was sitting upright on a sleek black mare, wearing her pastel pink cloak, and holding what appeared to be a massive, thick stack of bound parchment attached to a wooden slab. Chloe had essentially invented the medieval clipboard. Alexander. Julian's voice echoed across the gorge, dripping with righteous fury. You have defied the crown. Surrender the villainess and your wealth, and I may allow you to keep your head. Liam pulled his horse to a halt a few yards away. He let out a long, exhausted sigh, sounding less like a warlord and more like a senior manager dealing with an incompetent intern. Julian, Liam said, his voice magically amplified by a minor wind spell Chloe had bribed a local wizard to cast. Put the sword away. We aren't doing this. Julian blinked, lowering his blade a fraction of an inch. You surrender? No, Your Highness, Chloe chirped, spurring her horse forward. She tapped her charcoal pencil against her clipboard. We are auditing you. A collective murmur of profound confusion rippled through the front lines of the Imperial Army. Auditing. Julian repeated, his perfect brow furrowing. Is this some new form of northern dark magic? It's called a forensic accounting investigation, Chloe explained cheerfully, holding up the massive stack of parchment. And honestly, it is darker and way more terrifying than any spell. You accused us of gross financial incompetence, Julian. So my fiancé and I spent the last 3 weeks reviewing the imperial tax ledgers. And frankly, your data management is embarrassing. I am the crown prince, Julian bellowed, his face turning an unaesthetic shade of puce. You dare question my authority with paper? I question your authority with irrefutable proof of embezzlement, Liam shot back, his frat bro sarcasm completely replaced by icy, corporate ruthlessness. He urged his horse forward, holding up a magically sealed scroll glowing with the golden crest of the empire. You've been siphoning funds from the military pension treasury to pay for your lavish palace renovations, and the heroine's ridiculously expensive pastel wardrobe. Chloe nodded enthusiastically. I ran a regression analysis on the missing gold. The correlation between your unspecified royal expenditures and the sudden economic depression in the central provinces is statistically undeniable. P-value of less than 0.01, Your Highness. You are canonically broke. Lies, Julian shouted, raising his sword again. Army, attack them. Nobody moved. Chloe leaned forward over her saddle, projecting her voice toward the heavily armored imperial soldiers. By the way, did any of you get your quarterly bonuses? Because according to my spreadsheets, His Highness diverted your last 3 months of hazard pay to buy a solid gold carriage. The murmuring in the imperial ranks turned into angry, chaotic shouting. Several soldiers actively lowered their spears, glaring at the back of the crown prince's head. This is treason! Julian shrieked, his pristine white horse nervously sidestepping as his own army turned hostile. No, Julian. This is a hostile corporate takeover, Liam said, his voice echoing with authority. He tossed the glowing, magically sealed scroll at the prince's feet. That is a legally binding contract under the laws of the luminescent blade. You either step down immediately and transfer provisional authority to the Northern Duchy, or the magical guillotine you threatened us with activates on you for violating the imperial charter. Julian stared in horror at the glowing scroll in the dirt. He looked back at his army, who were now actively demanding their back pay, and then at the Duke and the wicked Villainess, who had defeated his entire military campaign with a clipboard and a pivot table. With a shaking hand, Julian dropped his sword. It hit the dirt with a pathetic thud. Checkmate, Chloe whispered, closing her eyes in overwhelming relief. The moment the sword hit the ground, the narrative climax officially resolved. The sky above the obsidian gorge didn't just brighten, it shattered. The world around them began to dissolve into blinding, white light, the sound of the angry army fading into a high-pitched ringing. Liam, Chloe cried out, the reins slipping from her hands as her physical form began to disintegrate. Through the blinding light, a heavy, armored hand reached out and grabbed hers, gripping it with desperate, grounding strength. I've got you, Evans. Liam's voice echoed through the void, sounding both incredibly far away and right next to her ear. See you in the library. And then, the world went completely blank. Chapter 13. The transition from a high-stakes medieval battlefield to a modern medical facility was anything but graceful. There was no magical harp music. There was no gentle descent back into reality. Instead, Chloe felt like she had been shoved out of a moving vehicle directly onto a hard, unforgiving mattress. The first thing that hit her was the smell. Gone was the crisp mountain air and the faint scent of leather and horsehair. It was replaced by the aggressive, unmistakable stench of industrial-strength bleach and rubbing alcohol. The second thing was the sound. The epic, roaring silence of the obsidian gorge was gone, replaced by the steady, obnoxious, and utterly terrifying beep 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 of a heart monitor right next to her ear. Chloe's eyelids felt like they were made of lead, but she forced them open. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room blinded her for a solid 10 seconds. She squeezed her eyes shut, groaned, and tried again. The blurry shape slowly resolved into a drop-tile ceiling, a sterile white wall, and a television playing a muted morning news broadcast. She tried to sit up, but her body felt incredibly heavy. A dull, throbbing ache radiated from the top of her head down to her shoulders. She reached up with a clumsy hand, feeling the rough texture of a thick bandage wrapped securely around her skull. Ah, the sleeping beauty finally decides to join us. Chloe flinched, turning her head slowly. Sitting in a plastic chair near the door, tapping furiously away on a tablet, was a nurse in dark blue scrubs. The woman looked up, a warm, relieved smile breaking across her face. Take it easy, the nurse advised, standing up and moving to check Chloe's foreline. You took quite a hit. Concussions are no joke. How are you feeling? Like I was crushed by a mountain of discounted legumes, Chloe rasped, her voice sounding like sandpaper. The nurse chuckled softly. Well, you aren't far off. You've been out for nearly 5 days. We were starting to get worried. 5 days. Chloe's mind raced, struggling to separate the vivid, sprawling memories of the northern fortress from the sterile reality of the hospital room. It felt like she had lived an entire lifetime in that ridiculous web novel. She remembered the taste of the iceberry jam. She remembered the heavy weight of her leather armor. She remembered Liam. Panic, sharp and sudden, spiked in her chest. She whipped her head to the side, ignoring the wave of nausea the movement caused. There was a second hospital bed in the room. It was empty. The sheets were perfectly made, tucked with military precision. Where is he? Chloe croaked, her heart monitor suddenly spiking from a steady rhythm to a frantic staccato. The guy who was brought in with me. Liam Hayes. Where is he? The nurse gently pushed Chloe by the shoulders, forcing her to lie back down against the pillows. Relax, honey. Your heart rate is jumping. He's fine. He actually woke up 2 days ago. Kept demanding we let him use a laptop to check some supply chain data. The madman. His family transferred him to an outpatient recovery facility yesterday morning. Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, melting back into the mattress. He was alive. He was awake. But a cold, heavy knot of dread settled in her stomach. He woke up 2 days before she did. He left. He hadn't waited. Did he remember? The narrative magic of the novel had been designed to wipe the slate clean. What if, upon waking up in the real world, the system had completely erased their shared time in the book? What if, to Liam, the last 6 months of running a feudal economy, fighting assassins, and holding hands in a freezing tavern had completely vanished? What if she was just the annoying girl who got crushed by a can of baked beans with him? Get some rest, the nurse said gently, dimming the harsh overhead lights. You've got a lot of recovering to do. Chloe closed her eyes, the throbbing in her head matching the ache in her chest. She was back in the real world, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Epilogue. It took Chloe a full week to get medically cleared, and another 3 days before she felt brave enough to set foot on the bustling university campus. The humidity of Lagos hit her like a physical wall as she stepped out of her rideshare. A stark, jarring contrast to the perpetual chill of the northern duchy. Students milled about, complaining about assignments, scrolling on their phones and drinking iced coffees. It was completely, beautifully normal. But Chloe felt entirely out of place. She adjusted the strap of her tote bag, her fingers subconsciously ghosting over her collarbone, half expecting to feel the heavy clasp of a velvet cape. She had tried to fall back into her old routines. She opened DaVinci Resolve, intending to finish her delayed YouTube video, but stared blankly at the timeline. She had opened her dual-degree coursework, but the complex mathematics felt trivial compared to calculating the tactical choke points of a magical imperial army. Everything felt slightly muted. Determined to snap out of her funk, Chloe marched straight to her ultimate sanctuary, the campus library. She bypassed the crowded study rooms on the first floor and headed straight for the quiet, secluded section on the third floor, near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. It was her spot, her territory. She rounded the corner of the heavy wooden bookshelves, dropping her tote bag onto her favorite corner desk. You're late. Chloe froze. Sitting in the chair opposite her, leaning back with a familiar, arrogant ease was Liam. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, no cape, no broadsword, no armor. But there, just above his left eyebrow, peeking out from his dark hair, was a fresh, faint pink scar from the accident. He didn't look like the cold Duke of the North. He looked entirely like the obnoxious business major who used to steal her library books. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't read his expression. Did he know? Was he just here to gloat about beating her to their study spot? Liam reached down beside his chair. He picked something up and slid it across the smooth wooden table. It was a tall, artisanal iced matcha latte. I tried to get them to add lavender, Liam said casually, crossing his arms and resting them on the table. But the barista looked at me like I was insane. So you'll have to settle for standard issue. Chloe stared at the green drink. Her breath hitched. She looked up slowly, meeting his icy blue eyes. They weren't glaring. They were remarkably soft, crinkling slightly at the corners with a warm, unmistakable fondness. You remember, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the library's air conditioning. Liam's smile widened into a genuine, brilliant grin that completely transformed his face. Of course I remember, Lady Seraphina, he said softly, leaning forward across the table. Did you really think a magical coma could wipe out the memory of you weaponizing an Excel spreadsheet to overthrow an entire monarchy? You're unforgettable, Evans. A massive, overwhelming wave of relief washed over Chloe. A bright, genuine laugh bubbled up from her chest. Not a delicate, polite laugh, but a loud, real one that earned them a sharp shoo from a passing librarian. She didn't care. She sat down, grabbing the iced matcha and taking a long sip. It wasn't quite as good as the ones her medieval head chef had made, but it was perfect. So, Chloe said, setting the cup down and resting her chin in her hands, her red villainous spark completely returning. What's the plan now, Your Grace? Are you going to go back to aggressively critiquing my supply chain presentations? Liam chuckled, reaching across the table to gently, firmly lace his fingers through hers. Actually, I was thinking we could start with a proper dinner date. No assassins, no blizzards, and definitely no canned vegetables. Chloe looked down at their connected hands, a soft, victorious smile playing on her lips. The narrative arc of the Duke's tearful rose was officially over. But as she squeezed Liam's hand, she realized their own story was finally, perfectly, just beginning. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.